Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a lot of information that we want to present today, so I'd like to get started and dive right in. Hopefully we'll have time for some questions at the end. So my name is Joe LeMaster with Blazent. I'm a systems engineer here, and today we're going to talk about the notion of closed-loop CMDB data quality for ServiceNow. So let's just dive right in. We'll start the presentation today with a quote from our friend Dennis Drogset at EMA. And something that Dennis talks about a lot is CMDB data quality. And what he points out here is that really achieving the full value from a CMDB really depends on a lot of things, but one that's really important is the ability to have accurate data in the CMDB. Because if you don't have accurate data in there, you're going to find that people aren't going to use it, and it's just not going to be a valuable source of information. So that's one of the fundamental things he talks about as he works with different companies. So Blazent has teamed up with Fruition Partners to develop what we're calling a data quality solution specifically designed for ServiceNow customers. So what does that mean, and what capabilities will that provide? Essentially, what you'll be able to do now is seamlessly populate, update, validate, and audit the data within your ServiceNow CMDB. In addition, you'll have the capability to address the root causes of those data quality gaps, the inconsistencies in the data, et cetera, that really originate in those data sources kind of out in your environment, both the electronic data sources as well as the asset tracking tools and processes that are out in place. So the ability to address those root causes, also you'll have the capability to monitor all of those infrastructure pieces that are in your environment that are supporting the critical applications and servers you're supporting. In addition, you'll have the visibility to manage the transformation across really all of the changing environments, and pretty much every environment is a changing one. So the ability really to have that visibility to manage and look across all those transformations occurring in the environment are some of the capabilities that we'll talk about today. Before we get started or dive in any further, just to introduce everyone that's on the phone that is presenting today, myself, as you see, I've been with Blazent a long time, principal systems engineer. In addition, two gentlemen that are presenting today as well, Patrick Stonelake, the co-founder of Fruition Partners, who's going to talk about the connector as well, and then from the Blazent side, Chris Schneider, who's our vice president of technical operations. You'll be hearing from both of those gentlemen in great detail and all of the information's there. And I don't believe we can turn off the beep, so I apologize for that. Real quick, let me discuss a little bit about Blazent, kind of, where we come from, what we provide, and then we can turn it over to the other gentleman. So what Blazent delivers is an IT analytics and data quality solution that really deliver a true end-to-end view of the IT infrastructure. So what does that mean? It's really the ability to get information from all aspects of the IT environment, both the PCs, the servers, the network devices, and everything in between, really giving you that complete and auditable view of the environment. Those analytics include things like hardware and software inventory reports, really spanning all of the assets out there, no matter if they're in the CMDB or not, right? A lot of organizations have multiple CMDBs and tracking tools. We'll look across all of those tools. The ability to analyze the coverage and accuracy of a lot of the key operational tools within the environment, things like your backup tools, your monitoring tools, antivirus, et cetera, all of those tools now can be analyzed from a completeness and a coverage perspective within Blazent. Also, one of the things we're going to talk about today, that ability to have a closed-loop solution to automate not just the population, but also the correction or the ability to fix inconsistencies within those CMDBs and asset management systems in your environment. We also provide the ability to audit some of the key attributes within the CMDBs, right, all the way down to the attribute level. Do we have inconsistencies and gaps in that data? Can we really audit that information and automatically update and correct that information inside of the CMDB? All of that's really based on a foundation of this notion of customer configurable business rules. Those business rules really provide the foundation to analyze and audit the environment moving forward across all these key analytics. This slide really speaks to just kind of some of the Blazent customer base, and really the point here to make is that there's a lot of large dispersed corporations out there using our software, really designed to get that complete visibility and data quality throughout the environment, and that's really the point of this slide. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Patrick to talk about Fruition Partners, and Patrick, I can advance the slides for you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Joe mentioned, I'm one of the founders of Fruition Partners. We have been working in the IT service management space since 2003. And during that time, we've been focused on the asset lifecycle and IT asset management in general as the foundation for all of the IT service management work that we do. So we started out working with Remedy and CA and a bunch of other tools that you're probably familiar with. And we generated our IT asset management process advice based on a lot of work with a lot of large customers over the course of the last 10 years. For the last 5 years, we have been exclusively focused on the ServiceNow platform. Having had a lot of experience with Remedy and CA and basically the client-server technology, we had determined that, for flexibility and also for forward-looking in terms of technology, the SaaS platform was the way to go. So since we've made that focus, we've become kind of the people to go to when it comes to IT asset management and specifically the CMDB in ServiceNow. So we've done this all across a Fortune 500 customer base. And for the customers we have, we provide basically a full service to them, rooted in ServiceNow as the platform. And that includes process assessment, coaching, education and training, both in terms of the disciplines like ITIL and ServiceNow, and in terms of end user training for organizational change and getting adoption of the tools as we configure them. We also have a group that I direct called the Innovations Group, which is focused on next level technologies on top of the ServiceNow platform. So that includes platform development. We do a lot of ad hoc platform development on the ServiceNow tool within IT and outside of IT, designing applications for various business purposes using the ServiceNow technology that our customers are all familiar with. We also have a big group that just does integration with ServiceNow as the root platform. A subset of that group works with service providers and independent software vendors like Blazent in order to create these kind of bulletproof, standardized connectors between these high-value external tools in ServiceNow. So we're going to see a demo of some of those tools a little bit later. But suffice to say that it's been a very productive partnership for us with Blazent because we've been addressing these IT asset management challenges for a long time. And we think we have a technology here that's pretty breakthrough in terms of what it allows our customers to do and the flexibility that it provides. So with respect to the partnership, we have a fairly exclusive list of folks that we collaborate with in terms of creating these connectors to ServiceNow. It's important to us that we have the ability to add value. So there's a trade-off in every relationship, and there's something you have to take a look at, what you're getting and what you're giving up in exchange. And we think this is a very positive transfer for a lot of our ITAM customers. So what this means is that our customers can use Blazent for data reconciliation and the powerful ServiceNow CMDB and the flexibility that it offers to create kind of a best-in-breed solution that is greater than the sum of its parts. And all that stuff is built upon ITAM processes that we've assembled over the last decade, which is intended to create kind of a practical crawl, walk, run approach to maturing your CMDB. One of the biggest challenges that we have in CMDB design and execution is data processing because, your reputation of your tool is only as good as the data that you can put into it and get out of it. So this is why the Blazent ServiceNow connector is really exciting for us. We think it's something that a lot of our larger customers are going to be interested in as they understand more about what it can do for them. So we can help scope and implement the Blazent technology in an existing CMDB implementation or in a new one. And we can continue to implement a roadmap, including any upgrades to Blazent, upgrades to ServiceNow. It should be a very turnkey process, which we're very excited about. So this is the kind of omnibus asset management slide that we like to talk about. I'm not going to read every word on it. But for those of you that are in the asset management space, you understand the challenges here. I just want to address the structure. So we're very process-focused people. So that asset lifecycle, which sits at the top, this is the kind of key stages that happen within the life cycle of a particular asset, be it hardware or software. Sometimes people call them different things, but essentially you're going from the acquisition process to the disposition process. As something moves through that life cycle, different bits of data support different ITIL or IT service management processes. Some of the text is a little small, but you can see that in the financial management, supplier management, vendor management side of things, you're dealing with the very beginning and the very end of the life cycle. And then when you're looking at something more like change or release management, you're dealing with the middle part of the life cycle, things that are in service, things that are being brought into service, things that are being taken out of service. So the ability of the CMDB, even a very sophisticated CMDB like ServiceNow, to support these ITSM processes is based on the quality of the data. And even more so than that, it's based on the trust in the data. We'll talk a little bit about what good data is. So we like to use a mnemonic, AACCRR, to talk to our customers about good data in general, but particularly good asset data, because asset data has certain characteristics that are related to trust and people's ability to have faith in the data, and these are kind of the most important, right? So data needs to be accessible and accessible to the right people and not too many people, particularly certain types of data, financial data, HR data. Some of these things need to be kept to a private group. It needs to be accurate, and this is where an important factor for the Blazent solution comes in. Not only does the CMDB data need to be identical to the data at the primary source, but the primary source needs to accurately reflect the attributes of the actual asset. So the closed loop that has been referenced here a couple of times, and you'll hear a few more times, is really important, because with something like a manual inspection or an audit that turns up in a manual edit to the ServiceNow CMDB, that needs to be able to be added to the theorem or to the equation when you're trying to determine what's good data and what's bad. The rest I'll just kind of touch on a little bit, right? So the data has to not over or under report the size of the environment. That's completeness. The data needs to accrue from these various sources across the life cycle, across different data sources, all those things that were at the bottom of the previous slide, and accrue to a single asset, and understand, when two data sources need to be assigned to the same asset and update the same attribute. And also data needs to be recent and relevant. Recent meaning that it's as close to live data as is reasonably possible. And in many cases, this is, no more than 24 hours, depending upon the attribute. And relevant means that once we've collected all this data, we're displaying just the data that's important to each audience that's going to review it. And for us, that means it's data that is operationally significant. Anything that's not significant to you accomplishing some task that's part of your job is really just noise that's cluttering up the screen and making it more difficult for you to use the tool. So this is the thing that is the killer or the wonderful miracle if you've got a good CMDB. It's the vicious or virtuous cycle of data quality. So if you have, particularly in a CMDB, if you have a situation in which people don't trust the data, whether that is misplaced or whether that's accurate, that's going to encourage them to use the system less. It's going to encourage them to participate less in the process of making the data good, which, again, feeds the actual bad data, which feeds the perception of bad data quality, and it all just keeps cycling around. We've all been familiar with situations like this, but the CMDB is particularly susceptible to it, because you have a set of audiences of platform owners that are very much, trusting the data that's coming from their primary source, and they're very suspicious of any gold standard or centralized CMDB data that you would purport is more accurate than theirs. So it's very important to turn this vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle, where the data is good, people know they can go there to get good data, therefore they contribute and they allow access to primary sources that improve the data, and so on and so forth. That way it's going in the correct direction. So when we talk about why the Blazent connector and why Blazent is important, we think, to our large-scale asset management and CMDB projects, the basic reasoning behind this is that, and this goes all the way back to our kind of remedy days. So there's a way to configure all of this data processing and business rules within the tool. ServiceNow is infinitely superior to remedy, in our opinion, in terms of creating these business rules and implementing business logic with individually configured rules that balance the sources against each other and make determinations as to which data we should use. We'll call that option A, right? In this case, we're configuring ServiceNow via business rules, via JavaScript for the most part, in order to process inbound data sources. We actually have a pretty sophisticated way of doing that. We have centralized CMDB rule sets that the sources then check against. But all of this stuff is done in ServiceNow's business rule configuration. So essentially what that means is that a ServiceNow administrator is involved in all of the updating, changing of business logic, any upgrades to third-party sources or primary sources that are coming into the tool. And every time ServiceNow has a release or an upgrade occurs to a primary source, the ServiceNow administrator has to be involved. You know, for some of our customers with large admin staffs and deep involvement in the data end of the CMDB, this works just fine for them. But the option of having Blazent do a lot of that processing for you has a couple of key benefits to our eyes. The main thing is that, as Joe mentioned before, this is customer configurable. So you're getting the same capability to process these complex business rules, but you don't have to edit code. And there's a benefit to that beyond just the fact that maybe your administrator doesn't need to edit code, and that is that you can push some of this data management and business rule management off to the platform owners that are at the primary source. So whoever manages your MS server environment, or whoever manages your software environment has the ability, if you grant them that ability, to change the configuration of the business rules, view the results, and immediately update any configurations that are associated with business logic without having to get your ServiceNow administrator, update the code, arrange for a code push between instances of ServiceNow, and all the things that are associated with changing code in your ITSM tool. And a lot of that stuff can then be handled at the Blazent level, and it just transparently updates in the tool as soon as your Blazent configuration change is complete. So on the next slide, I have an example of some of the code that is currently underlying a non-Blazent implementation in the ServiceNow CMDB. So as I said, this is pretty sophisticated, and for a lot of our customers, this is very superior to whatever previous asset management tool that they have. But there still exists this challenge of updating. So unless you're a JavaScript guru, which I am not, I can copy and paste and edit JavaScript, but I can't read that code like Neo in the Matrix. And some people can, but they're expensive, and they're also working on a lot of other things, and potentially they could be doing more valuable things. So we want to take a look at a new way to look at that original big graphic that I showed you, which is all that business logic that had been manually maintained within a layer in ServiceNow is now essentially outsourced to Blazent, giving the capability of customer configurable access to these business rules and data. And the other key aspect that's visualized here is that this stuff's coming in a closed loop, right? So Blazent can check on the CMDB and use the CMDB as an ingredient in its creation of this gold record, or this, absolutely trustable record. You can take the information that's manually updated in the ServiceNow CMDB and add that to the mix and make decisions based on it, which is pretty cool. And I think, is it Chris that I'm handing off to here?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate that. So I'm Chris Schneider, Vice President of Technical Operations here at Blazent, and we're just going to go through a couple of slides here and then get into an actual demonstration. We're not going to go through the entire product, but at least give you a flavor for how it functions and especially how it interacts with ServiceNow. Patrick touched on it, but just to elaborate a little bit, we began working together with Fruition. We were introduced to them by ServiceNow, who recommended them as a premier partner that we should consider when going about building the integration of ServiceNow. We evaluated a number of different partners and unanimously agreed internally that they were our first choice. And in fact, we have a mutual customer that we began working with as early as the middle of last year, which is one of the world's largest manufacturing companies. And we're deployed, in fact, together at that one very recently as well. So it's been a great partnership. We're excited to be working together, and the integration, I think, speaks for itself in many respects. So let me get a little bit more into the details. The closed-loop data quality architecture is what Patrick was talking about. And essentially, if you look at it, you have the CMDB near the top there, and all of the key ITSM functions hanging above it, which rely on accurate data within the CMDB. And as Patrick mentioned, typically within any CMDB implementation, ServiceNow included, you configure business rules. Those rules are manually configured, generally through back-end type configuration, and it goes through a development and a staging testing process, and then promoted into production. And there's generally extensive meetings between the administrator who is developing that JavaScript and the data source owners and the tower leads that are responsible for the CIs that are within that CMDB. And it's all a rather time-consuming process. What we've solved in that is really by shifting that out into the actual people that are responsible for the data accuracy and giving them a very intuitive interface that allows them to really configure the rules themselves, and as the environment changes and as things change, to be able to audit and trap and identify the discrepancies that are continuously cropping up within a CMDB throughout that ever-changing environment. So when we say closed loop, what we mean is we're bringing in, from a sort of rubber meets the road process perspective, we're bringing the CMDB data in on a continuous basis. We're then also bringing in a significant number of other tools. So whereas typically you might get a handful of tools at most being used, or maybe a single source or an agent populating the electronic data from one or more areas within the enterprise, we'll typically bring in 20, 30 different data sources that extend from antivirus, system monitoring tools, backup, patching, network discovery, things like Cisco works on network management tools, and bring those all together, reconcile them, match up the assets that are in each, and then, which I'll show you here in a second, is a way that you can then very easily allow Blazent to determine for you what is the most accurate value for any individual attribute that's being used to populate the CMDB, audit where that existing attribute may be inaccurate, and then automate the updating of that on a regular basis. So this was something that we recently did. It's still not fully live within ServiceNow, but we did receive technical certification on this in January for the actual connector that we collaborated on with Fruition. So to ensure that we're following best practices, that we're not in any way breaking any existing functionality with ServiceNow, and that everything is done based on their standards.
And I'll add in there, Chris, this is, I think, one of the first 3 or 4 in a line of several hundred that was certified. So even ServiceNow views this as a pretty bulletproof connector.
Yeah, we went through a little over 110 individual tests that we had to pass from a quality perspective to ensure that we followed the process that they had outlined as it relates to interacting, because we're going down at a table level and interacting through their APIs on that. So I'm going to share out here.
And while Chris is doing that, I just wanted to point out we're going to save up the questions until the end of the call and try to take questions at the end.
So, again, like I mentioned, given the time, we're just going to go through a small portion of the overall Blazen application. We have a number of modules that look at all different types of tool coverage and gaps from security, risk, compliance perspective, and backup and monitoring, and outsourcer billing, and things of that nature. We're going to focus exclusively in this data quality management section. And then even further within that, we're going to focus in on the integration within the ServiceNow CMDB. So there's 3 main areas to data quality management. And I'm going to go into the first one, which is the analytics associated with analyzing, and this is just for the existing CIs within the CMDB. There's another section which we do in another webinar around how can I identify and then populate on an ongoing basis things that I'm finding out in the environment. Just in the interest of time, we're going to keep this on interrogating existing CIs within my CMDB, and then how can I identify and automate the direct update of those either missing attributes or inaccurate attributes. So if I drill in, and we'll go back, time permitting, to show just kind of some of the basic configuration, because I'm assuming some of the folks on the call are probably pretty technical. But if I load up just the standard analytic, essentially what you would do is you would create what we call a Bullseye record, and that record would consist of whatever fields you chose to bring in. We have obviously a significant number of the out-of-the-box ServiceNow fields. If you've customized ServiceNow implementation in any way, which you almost certainly have, we can add those custom fields without a problem, and then those would appear in the interface and allow you to interact with those as well. So there's a basic example. Created a Bullseye record where I've chosen 10 different fields, the CI class category, serial number, the name of the machine, CPU counts, operating system information like the name, version, service pack, etc. So there's multiple views. This view is basically saying, okay, if I take the ServiceNow as my primary system of record and I compare it to this Blazent Bullseye derived record, which uses as many as 20 different sources to go out and figure out what is the actual value of this particular attribute, and each attribute would potentially have its own rule that you can configure and generate. And you can have as many different Bullseye records as you want. The idea here is that we're shifting it away from an administrator or business analyst of requirements gathering to go out and work with the people that are directly responsible for this data, and then going in through a JavaScript development cycle into an interface that allows those tower leads themselves, as they're often called, or the people that own, whether it's the Windows infrastructure or the Unix infrastructure or end-user compute versus servers or a particular data center, they can go in and configure their own rules, work with Fruition on helping them set that up. But as the environment changes, they're not beholden to go back and say, yeah, we've changed out some data sources, we brought up some new CIs, updated CIs, we need to go configure rules and put that in development and test. They can, in real time, set that up themselves, configure it, save that configuration, immediately view that in the analytics, and start updating or filling out the conflicts within the CMDB right away. And that's really the main shift, is moving from a back-end development method into the users now have control over their own data, and then that's handled from within the workflow and the typical role assignments that you would have within ServiceNow. So we're looking at conflicts, which basically say these values that are in these attributes conflict with what's in ServiceNow. So if I drill in on, say, asset name as an example, I get a list of CIs. And these individual CIs, name, tag, serial number, we're looking at a list in which the name of the CI in ServiceNow conflicts with what the Blazent Bullseye computed. And if you look at, there's a bunch of different methods. We won't go into all of them, but most frequent is just one rule that you can set up which says, I want to look at, I get good information, maybe it's CPU count or operating system version from 6 or 7 different sources in my environment. My monitoring tool collects it, my backup tool collects it, my software patch agent collects it. I'm going to use those to inform what is the best value around, say in this case, asset name, or in the operating system example, Blazent Bullseye derives in what it believes to be the most accurate value. I can click on these hyperlinks and then see these are all the different sources of information that exist within this particular tool. It could be 20 different sources, especially on the server side. And then what are the different sources that all agreed with it? And here's a classic thing that we see all the time. You have a serial number, it's in the CMDB, somebody pushed the serial number in as the name, and if you were trying to match this asset to other tools in the environment or other sources that only had name, which is most common, you wouldn't be able to do so, which then could cause duplication in the CMDB as you then say, oh, we got to add this asset in. So we have a very sophisticated multi-source reconciliation engine that does indirect matching that by pulling in these multiple sources can see how this actually matches up with this asset, which in turn then allows you to join together a whole bunch of different sources that you wouldn't be able to do with point to point. The idea being is that you can then see what is the rule that defines this, how many different sources there are, and achieve some confidence level for fixes you want to make. And as you go through, you can look at several different types of errors. I think you probably get the idea. But in going through, if I click on the OS name, I now see, okay, here's the value specific for OS. And if I take, say, I can filter, these are all the valid values that Bullseye computed. If I say filter on Windows Server 2003, I can see, okay, here's the values that I have in the CMDB. They had Windows 2000, or they just have sort of a basic just Windows Server, not enough detailed information. So now as it relates to the ServiceNow interaction, what I can do is I can say, okay, I want to send these over as tickets into ServiceNow to be processed and corrected and updated into the CMDB. So if I check these, I can check as many of them as I want. I can do a select all. I can open up and do as many records as being brought back into the grid. So I check those records, select create Blazent issues, which creates a ticket. I say submit. That's then going to go out. Now this makes a web services connection directly to ServiceNow and brings back the ticket ID and the issue is then being created. So I can go through, and I'll pop over to ServiceNow in a second to show you the other piece of this, which is missing values. So this is basically saying, if I were to go in and drill into OS name here, I could see, okay, I have a number of CIs for which I didn't gather any operating system information, and all the different operating systems that the various sources out in the environment was able to collect. And AIX, I think, is a good example because there's not a lot of agents that collect good AIX information, but if we filter through, you can see all the different combinations of sources that found it. And so here, Altiris agent, System Resource Monitor, and Tivoli monitoring, have all detected this is an AIX machine. And again, just kind of an example of information that's not always easily obtained from, say, your SCCM or your standard Windows agents that's out there collecting the data.
I wanted to add in there, Chris, if I could, that I think one of the major things that we've been talking about is this trust in the data. And what you're seeing here is a transparency that's not available in, even the best coded business rules. You don't have the ability to experiment and kind of get in there elbow deep and mess around with the data a little bit and understand where the advice that the tool is giving you is coming from. I think that's one of the big intangible benefits to this integration when it comes to building that trust and building the trust in the data.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Patrick. In a practical example where we recently deployed this together, there's dozens of different data source owners across a pretty large automotive manufacturing company, and they were spending a significant amount of time just in release management alone, going back and forth and configuring the specifics for what's the data that we're going to use to populate this attribute from this particular group of machines, and the meetings that would then take place with those people, and then go back, put it in development. Then those people would be invited into the development environment to review the data that was going into the CMDB, making sure it looked good. And there's no real easy way to interrogate that directly within ServiceNow. When we put this in, what they were then able to do is independently on their own, create their own Bullseye Records, interrogate the CI specifically within the system that they are responsible for, and fix the data. And literally what they told us is that what would take days and days in requirements meetings and validation and testing, and they never really had a good sense if it was accurate or not, they're doing it in a matter of hours with a high sense of confidence in terms of what the accuracy is. So I think it's a good point, Patrick. That's one of the key differences, both the time savings as well as knowing whether or not this data is accurate. So again, same kind of thing. I can check all these and create, some have already been fixed, and create issues and submit these to then I want to go populate this missing AIX operating system values into these existing CIs. So now, if we go over to ServiceNow, this is just your standard, this is the Berlin release of ServiceNow. And if you go through on the left-hand side, no doubt many of you are familiar with all the various modules within ServiceNow. Blazent integration is the new one. And then you would see then when we install the integration into ServiceNow along with the Blazent system. And there's various elements. You can see what are all the different issues, what's the missing assets, missing values. We've done some very specific work with the ServiceNow Discovery Agent to ensure, because the ServiceNow Discovery Agent, unlike other agents you may integrate if you were going to directly integrate an agent or other tools into ServiceNow before Blazent came along, it's very unique with the ServiceNow Discovery tool because it writes directly into the CMDB, unlike an external integration. So we worked closely with Fruition and ServiceNow to ensure that if we overwrite values from the ServiceNow Discovery because we've identified a more accurate value, the ServiceNow won't come along, the Discovery tool won't come along and overwrite that particular value unless it's found yet a newer value that differs from that value that Blazent derived. So it's to ensure that we don't get into this vicious cycle of, well, we found a better value in Blazent and the ServiceNow Discovery keeps overwriting it. So for those of you that have that deployed, we've addressed that issue. But if I go into the home page and refresh this, I can now see I have all these individual items that I've created around, in this case, conflicts as well as missing operating system values. So this just is a high-level overview to say, okay, what are all the different types of data issues that Blazent has found for me that is submitted? And at this point, this is where we then tap into and inherit the workflow of ServiceNow. So whatever rules you have in place around who can do what, who can see what, who can update which CIs within the ServiceNow CMDB infrastructure. We're not recreating any of that. We're tapping into those existing security roles and workflows. So if I click into one of these open issues, and I can then see all the different elements. I have a history, and then I have a record at an individual CI level of what the original data was, what it's been changed to, who changed it, and the type of tracking that you're going to have from an audit perspective. And you can see what was the old value that I had, what's the new value that I've created, and then also conflicts, whether it's conflicts or missing values. If I click into one of these, then what I can see then is this is just your standard individual CI type view. What's the old value that was in there? What's the new value that Blazent is recommending based on its derivation? I can go off and create a change request from this. There's different ways you can configure this, whether it's a problem or a change, so that I can then go and reroute this to another person to look at if I want. Then I can also open in Blazent. What that does is then that brings up the Blazent-like interface directly within ServiceNow to where I can then see and then look at. So now I'm the person. Maybe it was a lower-level data analyst that was doing some of this investigation and finding some anomalies. They've sent it over to be investigated. It's been assigned to me as the CI owner. Now I'm looking, because I own the Windows Server environment, at these data anomalies. I can see right within the interface, this is what we call our multi-source view, all the different sources that have collected information about this particular machine, and typical 12, 13 different sources that we might have found this on. And again, what was the method or the result to achieve a confidence level for, okay, I see 7, 8 different tools all saw this as a Windows Server 2003 device, and what the scan dates are, how recently they saw this information, and other details about it. And I can easily add any column I want from the default standard data model if I want to look at additional information. But that's where I can then say, okay, I agree with all of these. I want to update these values. So I check them. I can check them individually or do the whole lot at once, and then update system of record, which represents CMDB, say submit. At this point, it's closing out this ticket as having been resolved, and it's directly updating the ServiceNow CMDB with this new value. So if I go back out to my enterprise view, and I look at, again, this is your standard enterprise CMDB view within ServiceNow, and click on computers, I can then see, all of these that were recently updated, and the new operating system value that I can then drill in on and look at. And this is just your standard computer view within the ServiceNow CMDB. That's just kind of a glimpse, a little bit of a piece of the integration specific to the interrogation of existing CIs within the CMDB, and then how we identify those and handle them, and then can directly update them within ServiceNow. We're exactly at the 45-minute mark, and open up for any questions people have.
Yeah, Chris.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yes, hi. This is Bob Molyneux from Blackboard. I was curious about how you get the data into the product. Are there adapters or things of that nature that interface the various monitoring systems or inventory systems? How does that work?
Yeah, so we're like ServiceNow, we're a SaaS-based system. So we have, in a cloud-based environment, secure FTP that the data would be uploaded to, and there's various means. Oftentimes, because we don't want to put anything directly on any of those tools, the most common way is that the tool owners themselves, will provide an extract script, or they have an extract script that they're already using to pull data or report, and we just have them upload that particular data file up to our server, and then we suck it in.
Okay.
And then we do, from the ServiceNow side, part of the web service includes an integration where we do a direct pull from the ServiceNow CMDB via the web service on a continuous basis into Blazent.
Okay. Thank you.
There is a question, Chris, in the chat that says, can you please show how the reconciliation from various sources automation can be built and executed automatically when a CI arrives? Sure.
So let me go into the configuration. And so there's an element of what I'm showing you here really is how you can control it if you want. Then there's more behind the scenes to say, okay, I've achieved a certain level of confidence, just let Blazent update it. And so that's really more the automation part, which is simply a matter of, just saying, okay, don't force me to do it through the interface. As these machines come in, go ahead and update CMDB directly, and that's an option. It's not much to demonstrate in it, which is why we're going through the interface to kind of show you the way. But the configuration of sort of setting up these rules, which I'll assume is part of that question, is if I go in, load the one that we were just looking at, so here's all of the attributes that you would pull in from the ServiceNow CMDB, operating system type information, make, model type information, memory, CPU, department, location, standard kind of stuff you would expect. You simply select a field or multiple fields, bring it over, and then you can select them individually or as a group if you have certain fields that perhaps are all can be configured in the same way. And then if you select on an individual one, there's multiple methods to configure. One of the things that generally start with is do a preview. So we've brought in probably about 25 different data sources into this particular environment. And there's roughly 10 or 12 that actually have operating system information. So this would filter it out and say, okay, these are the sources of all those that you've brought in that even have any OS information at all. And you can quickly just go through it as a means to see, okay, which sources would be good candidates to determine a field that I want to use to configure my operating system attribute. And you can look directly at ServiceNow as well and get an idea for, okay, what's in there, breaks it down by your top 20 values, and then looks at how many of them are null. So here's a case where a little over half don't even have an operating system value within ServiceNow. Now it just flips. So again, you can just kind of go from source to source. This panel tells you null versus populated, and then how much is populated. So it's just a way to very quickly, for any individual attribute, kind of go through and look to see, geez, what is the data that is in these sources for this field. At that point, then, there's multiple methods to do the configuration, which is, if folks on the call maybe just go on mute, that'd be appreciated. So one of the methods is, this one is using the most frequent value, like we saw in the example. And what you can do then is you select what sources do you want to bring from the full list of sources that are integrated, and then you can see these are all the different sources that have been used to say from between Active Directory, Alteryx, Citrix, SCCM, Symantec, etc. Whichever operating system value is seen the most is the one that you're going to use. And as you can imagine, we've amassed over the years a pretty significant content library in makes and models and operating systems and all the type of information that you need, because in order to detect conflicts and get at the right value, you don't want to be showing conflicts on subtle string variations, which at a business level is really the same thing. So these sources then wash through our catalog, get cleansed into what would be sort of a final version of it, so we can tell distinctly, oh, it's Windows XP versus Windows 7, and not some conflict that's a Win 7 versus Windows 7 kind of conflict that isn't real. But the idea being, this would be the most frequent value. You can set up a rank rule that says, okay, I trust these sources the most as it relates to the operating system. I trust SCCM the top, Active Directory second, Alteryx and Symantec. So you can set up a rank rule. There's also a scorecard method which says, well, I have different sources that I want to add in, and I trust some of them with varying degrees. So maybe I say, well, I'll make SCCM an 8, and I'll make all the rest a 3. And if SCCM has a value that's different than the other 3, then I'm going to use the other 3 because their cumulative score outweighs that of SCCM. But as long as SCCM has a good value in it, then use that one as the most trusted source. So it's kind of a weighted most frequent value type rule. And then definitive source is the most basic, which is just use this source for this attribute. And the most common use case there is maybe it's procurement data or leasing data or license data, and you only have one source that even contains that information, but you want to use it to populate the CMDB. So the bottom line is you set all this up, you then save the configuration, it immediately processes, and then you can bounce back to the analytics to see the results, tweak it, look at the comparisons of ServiceNow, go back in and change the rule. So when we're working with the customers and Fruition, we're sitting down with the people who own a particular group of CIs, showing them how to do this, and then at that point, they're basically cooking their own Bullseye record, using it to interrogate and or populate the CIs that they own within the CMDB. So I hope that question out, and I'll stop just to be safe, in case I'm answering the wrong question.
If I can add into that a little bit, Chris. I mean, first of all, as somebody that's been tangling with CMDB data processing for the better part of a decade, I never get tired of seeing those. And I think the most important part is when you combine this ability to kind of interact with the data owner and process things in real time like this with the closed loop, you get a situation in which instead of things just happening on the inbound transform, right, where you're applying these business rules only when data comes into the machine or comes into the ServiceNow instance, you have a situation where you change the configuration and then the closed loop aspect of the connector immediately begins applying the changes that you've made and the results that ripple through the data to the ServiceNow CMDB rather than waiting till the next time you get an import on that asset. It'll also do that work for, assets that have been pre-existing and may not get a data feed for a while. So not only is that a great way to interact with the data, but when combined with the closed loop, you get a real instantaneous result out of your reconfiguration without having to wait for a patch or an upgrade.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Hey, Chris, another question is which versions of ServiceNow are we working with? And then kind of a follow-on there is how much of this functionality is out of the box and how much customization is required?
Sure. So Aspen and Berlin are the two releases that we support today. And then from an out-of-the-box perspective, when dealing with standard out-of-the-box fields within ServiceNow, then there's virtually, there's very little configuration as it relates to data quality management. The implementation at a super high level would be identifying what are the data sources that you have in your environment, providing extract scripts or working with those data source owners to obtain the data that would be sent up into Blazent on a continuous basis. At that point then, sort of our standard reconciliation and rules kick in to do the matching to produce the association between the records. And then the interaction to ServiceNow, the ServiceNow portion itself, where we install the integration, takes about 4 to 5 hours to set up and install. So it's a pretty straightforward installation. The only additional configuration that would be needed is if you set up custom fields within ServiceNow CMDB that are not out-of-the-box ServiceNow fields. At that point, then, it's simply a matter of adding those fields into the view that we use. So within, I don't want to get too goofy here, but if you go into the administration and you look at, the Blazent, you basically have all the various ServiceNow fields that are out of the box and the associated mapping to the Blazent attribute. And so it's simply a matter of going in and saying, okay, I just want to add a new field to this list and match it up against a new field that I'm going to bring into Blazent.
Another question here, Chris, was talking about other data sources. The specific example that Mike had was data from other cloud sources. For example, flag any Oracle databases that are at end of life based on notification from Oracle.
So we're talking, I'm assuming, this is not hardware or software-specific data, but database instance data. So this would be instead of a version of Oracle saying I've got an Oracle version 7.3.2 database. Can you tell me the things that are? Maybe I'm not entirely sure. Maybe you could clarify for us.
What I'm trying to get my arms around here is, do you work with external feeds, for example? Does your tool go out in any way, shape, or form and query whatever, for example, resource you might be able to point to in the Oracle world that says, hey, by the way, Oracle users, we're getting ready to discontinue support for 9i. So if you're not at 11G within two months, you can forget about any support. Can you download that into your product anywhere and then run whatever tools or anything else you have in your processes that would go out to my world and say, hey, Mike, you've got 15 databases out here that are going to fall off support?
Sure. So that portion is not yet integrated into ServiceNow, but maybe it's a little off topic. We'd want to save it, and I'd love to have a follow-up conversation about it with you, because we do have a software module that has the ability to look at various things. One of them is an application tracker to look at stuff like Oracle database versions. And in fact, we are working on end-of-life type information associated with that. So I don't want to say that we have the information specifically, but the ability to look at, we're in the process right now, in fact, of taking some of the top 20 vendors or so and pulling from their websites and whatever information is publicly available, surrounding end-of-life information. So probably want to go into some of the specific examples, but I wouldn't say that today we have all of that information collected, and it is not yet integrated into ServiceNow as part of the connector. But that is the logical next piece, of course, is the inclusion of the software information.
I'll just add there too, Chris. I mean, we've seen plenty of situations in which that is something like that is handled via a traditional kind of event or incident management integration, and then associated with the appropriate CMDB record, just a standard inbound alert or email or web services integration that creates an event that gets associated with the asset, so it doesn't have to go through data processing, because really it's an operational item that kind of stands outside the asset attributes.
Thanks for the answer. Appreciate it.
One more question, Chris. Kevin has a question. He just wanted to clarify, all non-ServiceNow supplied data, for example, Citrix, VMware, must be imported by FTP. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the primary method that we use, right? Just because we obviously can interact directly with ServiceNow, being two SaaS-based applications that we can build the service to, but the majority, and what we found when we used to do more direct connections, as we started to move away from on-premise installations to a SaaS model, going back in and making direct connections to a whole bunch of different systems started to become architecturally impractical. So we got really good at handling just about any kind of file you could throw at us, and most of these tools already have an extraction process and or script that we can help them with. So that is the primary method, correct.
And a follow-on to that, Chris, can CI data be uploaded to ServiceNow from sources via web service as opposed to FTP? Specifically, how we push data back and forth from ServiceNow is the question.
Yeah, that is a SOAP-based web service. So essentially, if I go into Joe, can you go to the closed loop slide? So on this, essentially, if you look at the CMDB box, that closed loop, which brings the data in, that's happening over the SOAP web service. And then all of the data that's down in the bottom section, the supply chain data, the systems management tools like antivirus and patching, backup and monitoring, or billing sources of information if it's an outsourced environment, that's what's primarily coming through the form of the FTP files, where we might be getting 20, 30 different data sources. And then as it goes in through this Arbiter or Blazent reconciliation process, the line that goes back up into the CMDB, that's the missing values, the data conflicts, the missing CIs, those get added directly into ServiceNow via the SOAP web service as well. So that part is contained and already part of the integration that we worked on with Fruition.
Thanks, Chris. I think we've reached our time limit. We appreciate everybody joining us today. John Luthold will be sending out a link to the recording that will allow you to review the presentation today, and also that will contain contact information for those of you who did not get your questions answered today. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.